Nighthawk is a Marvel character who started as a villain and turned into a hero. This is issue 1. Other than that lovely artwork, you may notice that there are some words here on the side. They say, "Back from the dead and ready to fly."
This is the last knock. My dad told me to say this.
Why am I talking about this random character that didn't even get a gig in the MCU? Or if they did, I didn't notice them. Because England said they wanted to rename the Night Watcher position to Nighthawk. It was clearly, a bit of a joke. As is England players currently imitating Elvis Presley. But this is where they are mentally right now. They're doing press conferences where they're admitting that they're trying to play like rock stars. And also that they didn't really look at the total of this chase that much, but that they still thought they could have chased like 450. This is a team who, coming into all of this, won 1 in 17, who in 2021 had extras as their 3rd highest scorer. And now I spent all my time updating this graph. I had to do it the first time because of England's chase at Lords, because I thought it was important to show how little of these things actually happen. Then I had to update it again because 2 chases in a row of that size is very special. When the 3rd one happened, I was back at the machine again. And this one we were starting to wonder if we were seeing something historic. But that New Zealand series was weird. The Kiwis only brought 2 batters with them, from what I could tell. They had COVID issues that caused them problems. They never once got their bowling attack right. They actually entered every game with technically 5-man attacks. And through bad selections and injuries and who they actually decided to bowl, they tended to end up with 3. Plus, we have to mention the balls, even briefly, because they have certainly played into this whole thing. Obviously, I have covered them, but in case you missed it yesterday, in the 4 years from 2018 to 2021, when the ball was 30 to 80 overs old in England, people still took a lot of wickets. And that has completely stopped happening this year. From what I could tell, this batch of cricket balls may actually have COVID. And the pitches have been extraordinarily flat, especially at the end of games. Look at this pitch. There was inconsistent bounce on day 3. By day 4, it had largely gone. What kind of bizarre shit is this? And I'm not sure England has faced more than a handful of dodgy balls in all of their 4th innings combined. But they have batted second at every game, which isn't really generally an advantage in Test cricket. But it has been to their new style. They're essentially turning tests into white ball batting, and in that, you want to chase. And I get that. What I don't understand is that the 4th innings is the only time in the game they are actually batting great. They're actually being outscored in the 1st innings this summer by New Zealand and India. It's close, and they do score quicker, but they're certainly not bossing the 1st innings. But let's look at all the innings and see what stands out. Okay, before we get to the end, let's stick with the 3rd innings, because this is interesting on a few levels. The first is that both India and New Zealand have struggled here, even though a couple of times they actually went into this area with a lead. This is probably where we haven't given England's bowlers enough credit so far. They've certainly managed to keep pressure on teams, no matter what the match situation. But as good as the England bowlers have been, batters have clearly been the story here. Even if you say they're going great in the field and the opposition bowlers are not, look at the difference between what is happening when they bat compared to the others. In the 3rd innings, the Indians and Kiwi batters have struggled to make many runs and also done it slowly. And then England go in, press turbo, and can't be dismissed. On the same pitches, with the same balls. This whole thing doesn't really make any sense. It looks like the pitches are pretty solid for the first, let's say, 2 or 3 days. Then on day 4, it's suddenly toxic. And then it seems like the ECB is just relaying a T20 strip for day 5. Even just looking at England's numbers from their 1st innings to their 2nd is a bit weird. They do score at a decent rate in the 1st knock, but it's nothing compared to what they're doing in the 2nd. And I did check. In ODI, since the start of 2015, they've actually been a faster scorer in the 1st innings. So they're not even quite following their own pattern here. Although sometimes when you listen to them at press conferences and speaking to the cameras, you do wonder how much of all this is a method and how much of it is vibes. And you can see that through the first 4 chases. Lords was an ODI chase. Root anchored that innings, even if Stokes and Bairstow were hinting at T20. Trent Bridge started as an ODI, moved towards a T20, and ended up as a T10. Headingley was a one-dayer until Johnny Bairstow came in and thought it was a T20. And then you have this chase against India. The only player who truly went really hard early on was Alex Lees, which, as I pointed out in a previous video, is insanity. Lees built his red ball comeback on never hitting the ball off the square. And in the 2nd innings, he charged in the 2nd over, and then reverse swept Ravi Bloody Jadeja out of the footmarks. But there was something else about this particular innings that reminded me of another game from a long time ago, when Pakistan lost to Australia after setting them 369 in a test at Hobart. Justin Langer survived an edge behind early on to still be at the crease when Australia had fallen to 126 for 5. Out strolled Adam Gilchrist at this point. And this wasn't yet the Gilchrist that would change how wicketkeepers scored in tests and ODIs. This was a Gilchrist starting to find his way. He was scoring quick, but nowhere near what he would do later in his career. The problem for Pakistan is that they had already seen the might of Gilchrist more than most countries had. Because while he might have only been in his second test, in his first, which was just before this, he'd smashed 81 from 88 against them. A few months before that, he scored 54 from 36 in the World Cup final against them. And when he first visited Pakistan, about a year before that, he smashed them everywhere, including a runner ball 100. Essentially, Pakistan saw the best of Gilchrist before the world did, and they were spooked. And so when he was batting at Belrive, they put the field out. They were so worried about his power and strength that they almost forgot that they needed to dismiss him. And the problem is that Gilchrist still scored at a runner ball, but he didn't have to take that many risks because of the field. And so in the end, he beat them by running, not by clubbing 4s and 6s. And in his test career, Gilchrist would end up with far more boundaries than runs. Teams would eventually start making him play bigger shots, and they even found ways to attack him towards the end of his career. All this brings us to, I suppose, Bairstow. India did some really clever things to stop him from destroying them at times in this match, especially the kind of strike rates he used against New Zealand. I think one of the more interesting things was the two catching fielders on the leg side around mid-wicket, and then a mid-on who was actually closer to a long-on or halfway between, meaning that Bairstow couldn't just hit through the line. And mid-off was also quite deep. And while this was happening, they also didn't feed him that many short balls, especially once he was set. And I think at times in the first innings, they were probably unlucky not to dismiss him. They certainly bowled very well to him. And in the second innings, and perhaps this has something to do with the ball stopped moving, it was kind of hard to see what their plan was. For instance, Jadeja has got Bairstow out 5 times in 76 deliveries when using the white ball. Every single one of those balls he's bowled to him was from around the wicket. That's T20s and ODIs. In this match, India took a far more defensive option and bowled over the wicket into the footmarks, which of course is something that Jadeja's never done to him in ODI cricket. And Bairstow was playing an ODI innings, and they were bowling to him with a strategy, and instead of bowling to him the way that Jadeja would bowl to him in an ODI innings, he weirdly changed it up again to the most defensive option he could find. Bairstow didn't really score off him, but nor was he dismissed by him. And India only did this one time, and who knows what they would have done in subsequent tests. But remember, New Zealand completely lost the plot against England. And India really committed to a plan, especially when it came to Bairstow and Root, and then didn't really change their ideas that much. While these two teams may not quite be at their best at the moment, these are smart, talented sides. And when they were presented with how England are playing, they've shown almost no idea of what to do next. We can continue on Mount Caveat, counting all the things that are currently in England's favour when it comes to this method. But we also have to admit that a lot of teams in the history of Test cricket have had favourable conditions and the opposition not doing too well and attacking batters and a new fresh vibe. And none of those teams are out there sending teams in, pretending this was white ball cricket, and then embarrassing quality opposition by chasing tough scores like they're running out the store to get some milk. I mean, England barely even celebrated this victory, and it was the highest chase ever. I mean, I think that tells you a lot. And of course you have to keep stating that it shouldn't have worked to this point anyway, probably. Yet, here we are. And until we see it in other conditions, it's just guesswork of how it will continue into the future. But that's tomorrow's problem. But for today, we just have to sit back and say, England aren't just back from the dead. They're flying. They were clearly once villains, and now they're heroes. For 4 games at least, the Avengers have assembled.